In 1959, Pete Seeger wrote a song called Turn, Turn, Turn. It was released originally in 1962 by a group called the Limelighters, and then it became very popular when it was released by the Byrds in 1965. In fact, it became #1 on the chart in December of that year. The song, as probably most of you know, is based on the first 8 verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. In the first 2 verses, Solomon writes this: "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven." When he begins verse 2, he says, "A time to be born and a time to die." The next verses, down through verse 8, follow with a list of a time to do this and a time to do that, usually a contrast. But I want to focus for just a moment here on what he says at the beginning of verse 2, a time to be born and a time to die. Really, those 2 events in our lives, we pretty much don't have any choice about those, especially when we're born. But we have very little control in most circumstances over even when we die. Most everything else that's listed down through verse 8 are circumstances under which we do have choices and over which we usually do have a control. But we don't have any control about these 2 events, the beginning of our life and the end of our life. You know, someone has pointed out that one of the most significant markings on a gravestone is the dash in between the year of birth and the year of death. Because the dash in between the year of birth and the year of death represents everything a person did in between those 2 very significant events, those 2 very significant years over which you really had no choice about. But what did you choose to do in between? My great-grandparents had their tomb rock installed at their gravesite years before they died. They would laugh sometimes when we drive by the cemetery and talk about, well, let's go see where we're going to be buried, because their names are there. How interesting it would be to think about seeing your own tomb rock and then envisioning those dates. But they're not the most significant. The most important is the dash. Use your dash wisely.